live from the Counterpunch Media Mobile Studios in Grand Blanc, Michigan. It's time for real lives, real families, real fitness. It's time for Derek Noel Fitness.
And what is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 15 of Derek Noel Fitness Live. I know we had last week off. We've been a little spotty on these episodes, but starting this week, we're going to be every single weekend again. So it's going to be awesome now that the 4th of July is over. Hopefully everyone enjoyed their 4th of July. I know I did. I definitely went off the rails a little bit, but that's fine because really there are only about 10 or 11 days out of the year that I really kind of try and go crazy on. Well, I don't really try and go crazy, but I allow myself to go off the rails and have some fun with. So it's only about 3% of the year. If you're on the other 97%, it's really awesome. Actually, one of my former coaches, Alex Macklin, posted about it. I shared it the other day. I do highly recommend you give that a read, especially because it'll put things in perspective for you in terms of nutrition. But, fun fact, we're not talking nutrition today, basically at all. Carbohydrates will come up a little bit later, but besides that, that is it. And before I go on, if you could please share this video so that we can get as many people watching as possible, spread the information as much as possible. This is going to be a really fun episode on energy systems. We are going to be nerding out a little bit. We're kind of going to probably a high school chemistry class level. I'm not going to try and make it really simple. I'm not going to be going in depth about too many different chemical reactions, but just with energy systems, I do want to explain fully what's going on inside the body so that you can understand and you can kind of figure out what's going on, see how we can make it a little bit more efficient. Now, I posted earlier with a photo from Parks and Rec, by the way, one of the greatest shows of all time, of Andy Dwyer basically saying that he hates running and basically everything hurts and he's dying. I could relate to that a while ago, so I'm a little bit better on it. That actually has to do with an energy system, running for long distances. Again, we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about strength and power. We're going to be talking about that burn that you feel when we're working out. It's going to be an awesome show. And remember, if you have any questions as they come up, please drop them in the comments below. I got my phone right down here, so if you see me looking down, that's where it is. Let's get this party started. We got a lot to get through. So, we're talking about energy systems. How does our body provide energy to be able to do things like lifting and running and basically any physical activity, really? Well, I mentioned before we have macronutrients, we have protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Carbohydrates and fats and a little bit of proteins are going to be coming in through this entire conversation, so just keep that in mind. Food is fuel, and this is how it gets sent into the body to be used for energy. This is going to be a good time today. So, we have 3 different energy systems that our body uses. We have our ATP-CP system, or you might have heard it ATP-PC. I'll talk about that in a second. That's also called our phosphagen system. We have anaerobic glycolysis, and don't worry, I'm going to be defining all of these as we go along, and then we have aerobic glycolysis. So we're going to be talking about all of these. It's going to be a good time. We're going to start with the ATP one, or the phosphagen system. Like I said, it's been called the ATP-CP, or you'll see some people write it as ATP-PC. It's all the same. So, first, let's define what those ATP things are. You really don't need to worry about what these big names are. I'll describe it just a little bit, and then we can kind of move on. Again, there are way easier names like ATP and CP or creatine, because that's really what it is. So, we have ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. So, that'll come into play a little bit later, that tri versus di. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then CP is creatine phosphate, or it can be called like phosphocreatine, which is the PC instead of CP. Just flipped around. Really simple. This is also one of the easiest energy systems to wrap your head around. So, ATP and creatine, so that adenosine triphosphate and creatine, are both stored in skeletal muscles. So they're basically stored in the muscles of your body. Your muscles only store enough ATP really for immediate use though. So it's only for a few seconds. So what that means is this energy system is what we use for the first about 8 to 10 seconds of exercise. So when you're feeling really powerful, or you have those first couple reps that you could just like blast right through and you feel super strong, that is because we're using creatine for for our fuel source. So when we have creatine phosphate. Let's talk about this. Triphosphate means we have 3 phosphates. Creatine phosphate has a phosphate in it, right? So since creatine is in the muscle, it's also the easiest for the body to fix with what happens. So we use energy, ATP. When that gets used in order to promote muscle contraction, which is a whole other chemical process, don't worry about that, it turns into a DP, or adenosine diphosphate. So it loses a phosphate. Creatine phosphate has a phosphate. So what does it do? It just goes, oh, I'm going to pluck this phosphate from here. I'm going to throw it onto this. Guess what? We have ATP again. Let's go. It's really quick. It's really simple, and it allows the body to move quickly. The only issue is, while creatine, it provides a lot of energy and allows you to replenish your energy very quickly, there's only a little bit of it in the muscle, so you burn through it really quick, which is why we really only feel the effects of it for 8 to 10 seconds before we move into the next energy system. So when that chemical process happens, by the way, there is always a waste product. In this case, it is creatinine, or however you want to say it. I call it creatine. I've heard people call it creatine. Creatinine is the waste product, and you'll actually, this number actually shows up in blood tests as well. So if you get a basic blood test, your creatinine levels actually show up if you're one of those people who reads through your blood test like I do, or if you're just one of those people who lets the doctor read it, they'll let you know if the number's really high. But typically, if you work out a lot, that number's going to be a little higher than normal. It's really nothing to worry about as long as you're in normal levels. And again, blood tests will tell you that. Your doctor will be able to tell you that as well. So we have a short duration, super high power. You can think of it as a matchstick. So if we're lighting it, we light it, we get fire right away, but it burns up quick. It's a lot of power really quickly. Our body creates creatine on its own. We all know of creatine as a supplement all on its own as well. Why do we supplement creatine if our body makes it? Well, our body only produces a really small amount of it. So we get most of it through eating meat. It is created through a couple amino acids in our body as well, but not nearly as efficiently as ingesting it. So athletes will take creatine in order to increase those levels a little bit. It's nothing, even then, your body doesn't store enough of it, so you can't just go, I'm going to have like 5 scoops of creatine and I'm going to be awesome. I'm going to have so much creatine in my body. Your body only stores so much of it. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough that it'll increase it so you'll be able to do maybe 1 to 2 extra seconds into a sprint, which may or may not be enough to win a sprint contest, or another extra rep if we're working in a really low rep range with really heavy weight. That is why we supplement creatine, which, by the way, is the safest supplement on the planet in terms of everything else. The only drawback to creatine really is if you take some powders, and even then some of the newer ones, this is more of a, if you have one of the older forms of creatine, if you ingest it and it's still in powder form, it is also hygroscopic, meaning it pulls water, so it can dehydrate some of the stuff inside, and the most it'll really cause is gastric distress, so some troubles and some rumbles in the tummy. That's basically it though. The pros far outweigh the cons in basically everything. It helps improve your brain function, it helps your muscles, it helps recovery, everything. Another, I guess, drawback is you do hold a little bit more water when you're on creatine because it does pull it, but it's in the muscles. It helps your muscles stay more full. How do we train this system? That is also a good question. Well, if we want to train the system to become more efficient, we have to become more powerful. We have to train those power things. So things like a 40-yard dash, things like a 1 to 2 rep max, maybe 3 rep max lift. Typically, I don't prescribe 1 rep maxes very often. Anywhere from 3 to 5 is really, really good to generate power. Or if you're just starting out in strength training, something like a 5x5, which I can talk about later, can help out as well. So we have all of these different things going on. This training this system, the ATP, CP, PC, or phosphagen system, will make you stronger and more powerful. If you're an athlete, if you're a normal person, it'll just get you stronger, and you'll be able to feel those effects pretty well. Let's go into the second system. So after we're into that 8 to 10 second range, what happens? Well, the temporary stores of creatine in our body kind of run out. If we want to wait for that to come back, it's typically about a 3-minute rest period, which, by the way, is why some strength and powerlifting athletes take 3 to 5 minutes to rest between sets so they can fully bring those stores back up and be able to do that again. Because, again, your body does replenish it. It's just very slowly. Next one we have is anaerobic glycolysis. You can think of this just as the anaerobic pathway, basically. Let's break that down real quick. Aerobic means with oxygen. So if we're anaerobic, we're doing this without oxygen. So we're still not dealing with what happens when we actually get oxygen into our system. This is the system that burns, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So we have anaerobic, so without oxygen, and then glycolysis is glucose breakdown, is basically what it translates into. So we are breaking down glucose without oxygen in this energy system. This is the one that a lot of people, especially people who have worked with me in a boot camp setting, this is the one that we use a lot of. Naturally, your body holds glycogen in muscles. All glycogen is basically glucose or sugar. It's a basic carbohydrate. I'm not saying eat table sugar or anything like that. Your body will naturally replenish it when it has carbohydrates. That's what our digestive system does, is it breaks down carbohydrates into these simple building blocks like glucose. This energy system also produces power, and the breakdown of glycogen produces power, but not nearly as much as creatine, which is why we start to get a little bit less powerful. We can still push those reps, but they start to move a little bit slower because it's a little bit more strenuous because we're not getting as much energy to push through. By 30 seconds of effort, this is the primary source of energy that we're using. Our creatine has been burned up. We haven't quite kicked into the last one and started using oxygen yet. This is the primary source. After about 45 seconds, the next system starts to kick in. So glycogen is broken down into glucose, and ATP is burned by breaking down that glucose. The glucose is used to create ATP, and more ATP is produced. So basically, if you take glucose, it takes ATP, and then it basically doubles it. So there's a number. I'm not going to worry about the specific numbers. We'll just keep rolling through this. The byproduct here is pyruvate, which is acidic. There are also some hydrogen ions that are released as well. And again, we'll get into that in just a second. The more pyruvate that is produced, the more acidic the muscle becomes, and there's no oxygen around to break it down. So what happens is the leftover hydrogen ions that I just mentioned bind with that pyruvate to create lactate, not lactic acid. This is actually a very, very common misconception. Lactate and lactic acid are completely different. Chemically, one is a base, which is the lactate. The other one is an acid. If you want to know what you get in lactic acid, if you have sour milk, that's what you're smelling and tasting, as if you're drinking sour milk. That's lactic acid. Lactate actually helps us. So we're not feeling lactate. So when we say we have that lactic acid or lactate buildup in our muscles, that's actually not what we're feeling. We're feeling those muscles becoming more acidic. That's why those legs start to burn if we're doing squat jumps and things like that. That lactate helps prevent acidosis. So that's what helps us kind of push through and kind of mitigate it a little bit. How do we train this? Well, we can do 3 sets of 10 of basically any strength exercise and perform them slowly. So if we take about 5 seconds to complete one rep, so if we're doing shoulder press, we take like 5 seconds to do a rep, our shoulders are going to be burning pretty bad. That's where we're working with that this second pathway, that anaerobic glycolysis pathway. You can also do circuit training, which a lot of you who are listening I know are very aware of, where you can go up to 45 seconds work and 15 seconds rest. This is what we do at boot camp a lot. We become really efficient, or we can do a few sets of 30-second sprints with some rest in between, which is typically how I train. If I'm doing that, I'll do like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, sprint training if I have to. So before I move on to the third one, we're going to take a really quick break.
You're listening to Derek Noel Fitness here on IPMNation.com/counterpunch. He'll bring the smarts, Now the sweat, well, that's up to you.
And we are back. All right, so real quick to recap, because I've gone through a lot. We have the phosphagen system, which is our power system. That's what we're using whenever we're focusing on those really big lifts, the really big compound movements, the things that we need a lot of force on, or if we're running like a 40-yard sprint, 40-yard dash, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're using with that system. Burns out fairly quickly. Then we have our anaerobic pathway, the anaerobic glycolysis, which we use without oxygen. It burns carbohydrates, and it gives us energy back. And after a few minutes, that will start to move a little bit more slowly, and the third one will take over. Now, fun fact about the third one. It is almost always active, no matter what we're doing, whether we're in the first or the second pathway. This third one is almost always active because we're breathing, we're taking in oxygen. It's usually always producing energy, and it is the big engine. It doesn't produce a ton of power, but it produces sustained power, so you can think of it that way. Another way to think of this is that phosphagen system is like a V8, lots of power, burns through really quickly. This one is like a V6 engine, so it'll not as much power, but still pretty decent. And then this one is like the diesel engine, so it provides sustainability. So here we go. This third one is, well, the second one was anaerobic glycolysis. So what happens when we introduce oxygen? This is aerobic glycolysis. And even though it's called glycolysis, fats and amino acids can also be used in this. I'm mainly going to be talking about what happens because this all builds on each other. This is actually a really cool one. This is also the most complicated one by far. There's even information that I'm not going to delve into, even though we are nerding out today. So the aerobic glycolysis produces the most ATP, but it produces it the most slowly as well, and actually not even in our muscles. The first two happen in our muscles. This one happens somewhere else. So keep that in mind. That's another reason it goes so slowly. So when there's no oxygen introduced, that pyruvate and lactate happens, right? What happens if there is oxygen introduced? Well, then this one kicks in. And this is why it's almost always active, is because there's almost always oxygen coming in. When oxygen is introduced, there's something called the Krebs cycle that happens. And I'm going to get on a soapbox real quick, because there are a lot of fitness influencers who have no idea what they're talking about. They're talking about like keto doesn't invoke the Krebs cycle, which means you're going to burn more fat, and that is complete bull crap. If you ever hear someone saying that they're trying to stop the Krebs cycle, you need to turn around and run the other way immediately, because they have no idea what they're talking about. I'm not naming any names, but I have seen it on things like Instagram and stuff like that, and all I can do is shake my head. So what happens with this? We have those things that are happening, and then when we introduce oxygen, we have something called acetyl coenzyme A, which is basically just converted over, and it's broken down into what we know as carbon dioxide, CO2, which we can breathe out. And it creates hydrogen. So more ATP is produced. Hydrogen is sent along to something called the electron transport chain, which is a very, very complicated system that it will take me an entire episode just to talk about it because it's so complicated. But just know that happens. Hydrogen goes through a different series of reactions in that to form more ATP, and water is a byproduct. So this system basically creates carbon dioxide and water as byproducts. We don't get as sore from this, but it happens. So what does this pathway actually do? Well, like I was saying, this also uses fat. So if we have no more glycogen to use in our muscles, then it starts to convert fats or proteins too. It'll break down protein or fat depending on what you have more of in order to use as a fuel source. What is this? This is the pathway that marathon runners are into. So when you see people running really long distances, if you have marathon runners, 5K runners, they're really starting to tap into this pathway, and they are very, very efficient, and it seems like they can go on basically forever. That's the energy system because there's so much ATP, so much energy that can be produced from this pathway, which is really cool. By the way, I just want to say a quick reminder, if you have any questions about what I'm talking about, drop them in the comments below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. This pathway can be trained most effectively by a few things. Intervals of longer durations. So if you do some running intervals where you are running for a couple minutes at a time and you're walking for a couple minutes at a time, if you're doing anything continuous, so if you're going out for a run and it takes you 15 minutes or more, which is typically what marathon runners do, they'll put in like 10, 15 miles a day and just keep it going all the time. They're doing a really good job at training this. Your body will use a lot of fat to burn through this. Or you could do something called variable training, which is basically how you feel. Really more advanced athletes who know their own bodies really well will take advantage of this variable training because they're aiming for no rest period. So they'll be moving and they'll slow down or they'll ramp down that intensity. They'll scale back that intensity a little bit to be able to keep themselves moving, and then they might be able to push back into it again. Those are the most effective ways to train that one. So when does this one actually kick in? Really after about the 3-minute mark is when it starts to kick in. So if we're doing a longer sustained thing, the first few seconds when we're feeling really powerful, we're feeling super gung-ho, we're in that phosphagen system, we're burning that creatine off, we're really getting after it. Then if we're going and we're moving past that 10 seconds, then we're going to start moving into that anaerobic pathway, anaerobic glycolysis, and we're burning through some of those, a lot of that glycogen that's stored in our muscles, which, by the way, you can increase the amount of that by eating more carbohydrates. Just saying, because carbohydrates get broken down. If you have no carbs in your system, your body actually becomes more inefficient at this. So, not knocking keto, but those people on keto might do really well with that third pathway, that aerobic glycolysis, because it can use fats, but those fats aren't really used too much in this aerobic or the anaerobic pathway. Which is why if you're an endurance athlete, keto might be a good idea because you become more adapted to using fat stores. But there's also the drawback of you become more efficient at using carbohydrates because your body isn't on that, it's using ketosis. If you're always using carbohydrates, if you're never running, that aerobic pathway might not be the best. But like I said, the nice thing is that aerobic pathway is almost always being trained no matter what we're doing, which is really cool. Because then you can be training these first two and you'll still be getting better at that third one. Drawback is if you're only training that third one, you're not getting more efficient at using those first two either. So just keep that in mind. We are rolling through this today. So like I was saying, if you have any questions, please drop them below. If you have any comments or if you have any friends who think you might benefit from that, you can go into that as well. I want to go into a few more specific examples of how to train each of these because I threw out a couple kind of broad examples. So let's talk about the phosphagen system for a second. This is actually my favorite energy system to train. If you're a power lifter, this is your go-to. You don't spend a lot of time working 8 to 10 reps or anything like that. We're focused on big power. So a good way to do this, if you're looking to train this program, or this one, is to do a big compound lift, like a squat or a deadlift, and go for probably no more than 3 reps or more. So if I'm trying to train this pathway specifically, I will do a 3-rep max deadlift, and then I'll start to go into my accessory work, or I'll finish off with some sprints if I'm doing a cardio day or something like that. I love doing sprints. I hate marathon running. Anyone who knows me knows how much I can be really whiny when it comes to running, but at the same time, I know why I have to do it, because I want to become better at it. That anaerobic glycolysis, circuit training, like I said, boot camps are amazing for training this one. When we really start to feel that burn, that's where we're starting to get the most bang for our buck, because then the next time we might not get as sore and our body's adapting. Not only energy system wise, but our muscles are adapting too, because if we're starting to feel that burn, then those muscles need to be able to hold more glycogen, then they'll get bigger or we'll get more muscle fibers. So that way our muscles start to grow. So if we're working with hypertrophy or we're trying to gain muscle size or things like that or become more dense muscles, bodybuilders are really, really good in this pathway because they're always chasing that burn. They're doing really well with it. Naturally, you'll get stronger. You just won't get it stronger as quickly working through this one. Really simple thing you can do is if we're doing a shoulder press, like I was saying, if you go up, take like 2 seconds to go up hold it for a second up top, bringing it right back down nice and slow, and that's 1 rep. And we're taking about 30 to 40 seconds to finish each set. We're getting that time under tension. We're really working hard through it. You can do that with basically anything. So if you have a shoulder day, really pushing through with those shoulder presses. We could do some side raises, some front raises, some upright rows, some leaning lateral raises with a cable. All of these will eventually become videos, by the way. We actually just started filming different exercise videos. Hopefully you'll see those soon. I just need to record voiceovers for them. And I really think it's going to be helpful. Plus, then if I'm talking about them, then I could just pop them up on the screen. It'll be really cool. I'm digressing a little bit, but that's fine. Last one, again, if we're trying to train that aerobic pathway, really you need to be doing long, steady state cardio. And I'm not talking just walking. Walking will get the job done, but it won't get the job done as well as if you're going into a light jog or things like that. Fat burning and weight loss is a whole other ball game. Basically, if you're doing this for fat loss or weight loss, you just want to get your activity level up. Just go for about 10,000 steps a day and get your nutrition right, and it'll be good. If we're looking to specifically train this, so if you are looking to become an endurance athlete, run marathons or ultras or anything like that, triathlons, you want to be spending some time doing things like runs for longer than 15 minutes. You can row if you are a little overweight and you still want to train this. Jump on the elliptical. Keep yourself going at a steady pace. You're probably going to run out of breath, and that's okay because that just means we're making those adaptations in order to pull oxygen into our lungs and use it more efficiently. Guess what? Oxygen used more efficiently is training this one directly, which is what we're looking for. If you got something out of this, please let me know. Drop it in the comments below. If you would like to check me out, you can always go to DerekNoelFitness.com. I believe the shop is up if you'd like to purchase one of these shirts, so you can always send that straight through. I would love for you to order one of those. So basically what I'm saying is my merch line is open. Right now we have t-shirts, we have tank tops, and we have hoodies. There might be a little bit of a wait on getting them, but rest assured I will get those to you in a timely fashion. You can always check me out as well here on Facebook.com/TheDerekNoel. You can listen on IPMNation.com/Counterpunch, or you can watch it at IPMNation.com/DNF. You can also find me on YouTube. I will make sure I get the YouTube link into the description of this video, or you can post my previous thing with that Parks and Rec reference. Again, best show ever. That way you can keep it moving. And of course, every Tuesday, I have it set so it will automatically upload starting at 1 a.m. on Tuesdays. You'll be able to download the audio of this to listen via podcast form in your favorite podcast form. All you have to do is search Derek Noel Fitness. If you have any questions you'd like me to answer, you can feel free to shoot them to me in a DM. You can find me on Instagram at the Derek Noel. I'm basically everywhere you need me to be. Hopefully you got this. Oh, and I'm going to tease my subject for next week. There are 10 different modalities of training, so 10 different things you can train. We're going to talk about all of them next week. That's all I got for today. Enjoy the rest of your week, everyone.